Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, where our job is to help you build visibility, professional credibility, and connection with your ideal client by putting the human at the center of innovative marketing, so you can build and strengthen an engaging, enduring relationship with your ideal clients. I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm honored that you're here with me. If you haven't joined our wonderful marketing transformation community yet, go to innovabiz.co and collect your free gift as well. Do subscribe to the show and also leave a review because it helps others find us. Let's get into today's masterclass on this InnovaBuzz podcast.
It's really worth believing in yourself. It's really worth pursuing a dream. The sacrifices that we make, the fear we overcome, the mountains we have to climb, the tiny glimmering star in the dark night that's our dreams is really worth reaching for. It's really worth struggling for.
Welcome back. I hope you've had an awesome week so far. If you haven't yet listened to my recent conversations with Dr. Rick Kirshner, co-author of Dealing with People You Can't Stand, and with Jason Case of Points Peak Marketing, then do check them out after you've listened to today's conversation. I'm really excited today to have on the InnovaBuzz podcast as my guest, Ed Cressy. Ed says he's almost certainly the only person to ever have been arrested by the FBI and then turned his life around to receive a community service award from the FBI director. As a person addicted to methamphetamine for 11 years, Ed threw away a career with Genentech, later named Fortune magazine's best company in America to work for. He threw away his home. He threw away his life savings, his relationships, his beloved dog, and much more. Ed spent months in jail, nights in homeless shelters, years in destitution and drug-induced psychosis. Yet, through being of service to others, he rebuilt his life and now inspires others to do the same. As a socially conscious entrepreneur, he's worked with clients including Cisco, Google, LinkedIn, and Slack. He's delivered a guest lecture for the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He volunteers inside maximum security prisons and jails, coaching entrepreneurism and employment. In our discussion today, Ed talked to me about finding new meaning in your work and your life through second chances. He explained how confronting your fears and getting out of your comfort zone will actually move you forward. And we talked about finding your purpose in service to others. Without further ado, then let's fly into the hive and get the buzz from Ed Cressy. Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast today from Massachusetts in the USA, where he's kind of temporarily relocated from San Francisco, Ed Cressy, who's an author, speaker, and entrepreneur. His book is My Addiction and Recovery. Just because you're done with drugs doesn't mean drugs are done with you, which is a fascinating story, and we're going to delve into that a little bit today. So welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast. Ed, it's a great privilege to have you as my guest.
It's wonderful to be here, Jürgen. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
George Bryant, who was our guest on episode 226 and episode 300 of the InnovaBuzz podcast, he kind of introduced us because we met at one of his networking events. So big hello to George and big shout out, and great to meet wonderful people through his community.
George has been so helpful to me. He's been a beautiful individual, so much savvy when it comes to how to bring value to one's audience. I'm very grateful to George as well.
Yeah, now speaking of bringing value to an audience, you describe yourself as a socially conscious entrepreneur. That's difficult to say, and perhaps even difficult to do as well. The one of the things you do is volunteer inside maximum security prisons and jails, and you coach entrepreneurship and employment there. Now, I know that there's a fascinating story behind this, so give us a bit of a high-level whistle-stop tour of how you got to do what you're doing today.
I'd love to, Jurgen. What I like to say, and to summarize myself, is I am almost certainly the only person ever who was once arrested by the FBI, then was recognized with a Community Service Award by the FBI director. I was so fortunate to have received help from incredible, remarkable individuals and organizations to turn a life around, my life around, from decades of addiction to drugs, criminal activity, making terrible decisions that hurt me and hurt the people around me. Fortunately, I put all that behind me and now am able to live a life of service, which includes, as you were so kind to mention, volunteering inside maximum security prisons and jails to help others who are transforming their lives as well.
Fascinating. Now, going back to the time where things started to go bad for you, what were you doing? Where were you in life at that stage?
I started off with an idyllic childhood in many respects. I grew up in the beautiful woods of Massachusetts, was provided a college education, a career with a firm called Genentech, which was the number one best company in America to work for, according to Fortune magazine. Genentech treated me very well for the time I was there. I owned a home in beautiful San Francisco, yet all along I made up for deep insecurities and negativity towards myself with addiction to doing drugs. My dream since I was a kid was to become a writer, was to publish a book, yet I lacked the discipline, I lacked the belief in myself, I lacked the courage to pursue my dream of becoming a writer. Instead, I went after these material things, the home, the car, the motorcycle. There's nothing wrong with any of it. Yet what I discovered was none of these material things substituted for the emptiness I felt inside from my lack of pursuing what was my true passion in life, which was being a writer, which was bringing value to others via writing. So I took the easy, quick way out. I took what was the illusion of confidence, illusions of self-worth, heavy drinking, intoxication, followed by hardcore addiction to doing cocaine, marijuana, finally for 11 devastating years, methamphetamine. At the tail end of my addiction, all those things I mentioned, the career with Genentech, the home in San Francisco, the motorcycle, the car, my beloved dog, all of that and much more I had put in a glass pipe, smoked away. I was living in a flophouse hotel in San Francisco. I hadn't showered or brushed my teeth in months. I was eating food that I found or cheating welfare. I would get in the States, we have what are called food stamps. They might have that elsewhere in the world. Basically, it's a welfare program whereby you're given credit to buy food. But what I would do was I would take my food stamps and trade them for steaks, which I would then trade to the drug dealer for methamphetamine. In my squalid hotel, there was a little sink in the corner where I would ash my cigarettes, where I would wash my clothes and urinate. This was my life, and it had been for years. I went into what's known as methamphetamine psychosis, which I believe is comparable to paranoid schizophrenia. for years, I heard these disembodied voices threatening to kidnap and torture me to death. I believed in this vast FBI conspiracy that had targeted me and was trying to pin 9/11 on me because I had inadvertently befriended a 9/11 hijacker. And Jurgen, I could go on and on and on. The point is, when I was 16 years old or 14 years old and picked up that first drink, when I was smoking marijuana in high school and doing cocaine, partying in college, I never anticipated waking up one day naked on the floor of a padded jail cell because I had broken into my relative's home to steal for meth money, which is actually what happened to me. I never set out believing that that was the future. So I'm not advocating to your audience to not do drugs. I'm not advocating to do drugs. What I'm saying is my story hopefully illustrates that sometimes we set ourselves on pathways and we don't understand exactly the risk we're taking, the harm we're bringing to ourselves and others. Hopefully for people who may be struggling like I struggled, for loved ones, and oftentimes we who struggle with addiction, we hurt those around us more than we hurt ourselves. My story illustrates that we're on pathways, and hopefully even more so that we can get off these pathways, that we can overcome even the most desperate seeming circumstances of addiction and mental health challenges as I face. We can overcome that in order to be of service to society, because that's what I was allowed to do.
Yeah. Well, it's a really, it's an emotional story to even listen to, but I can't imagine having lived through something like that. And we'll get on to exploring, your turnaround and what you do today, because I think it's just fabulous what you're doing today and giving back and serving. What I'd like to ask, because I was reminded there of something you said at the end. I was reminded of a quote I heard recently, and I think this applies across the board in life. And it's the quote, and I don't know who it originally is attributed to, but the quote basically says that if you don't heal what hurt you, you'll bleed on those that didn't hurt you, or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess there's a message there, right? What I know, when I first met you and we had a conversation, you talked about one pivotal event. Was there one kind of point that you got to where you said, I have to change things. I can't keep going like this?
There were a number of points like that. There was a time when I was staying in a homeless shelter. I bought a cigarette for $0.25 and realized as I was smoking that cigarette, I had just spent 1/3 of my entire net worth on a single cigarette because all I had to my name was 75 cents, and I spent 1/3 of it on that one smoke. I think the really pivotal moment came on an October night in 2007 when I was living in that Flophouse Hotel. The only clothes I owned, about the only clothes I owned, was this filthy tuxedo. It sounds ridiculous, but I had worked at these strip clubs in San Francisco. The strip clubs fired me because I was a terrible employee. I kept the tuxedo. I was wearing this filthy tux. I made my way into a downtown fancy San Francisco hotel, began wandering around. I found my way to a bar. Someone had set down a half-finished drink. I waited till the person turned away and knocked the drink back, slouched somewhere else in the hotel, and found myself at the threshold of a ballroom. So here I am in my ragged, filthy tuxedo at a hotel ballroom in which a wedding reception was taking place. Now I'm thinking, I'm going to crash the wedding reception, blend in, wearing my tux. Maybe they'll think I'm a groomsman or something. I wanted something to drink. I wanted something to eat. At that moment, at some level, it occurred to me that in the previous few years before that October night, I had been invited to 5 weddings. These were 10 of my closest friends. Jurgen, do you know, out of those 5 weddings I showed up to, How many I showed up to?
Well, I do because I've heard the story.
You can probably guess, even if you
Hmm.
hadn't. Zero. Not one. 10 of my closest friends, one couple even asked me to serve as their best man. I missed all the weddings. So there on that October night in that fancy hotel in my filthy tuxedo at the threshold of a wedding reception, I realized at some level just how far my poor choices had sunk me. And if that weren't enough, the disembodied voices that I'd been hearing as a result of methamphetamine psychosis at the time in October 2007, I considered them my spouse. That's how married I was to this delusional fantasy world of FBI conspiracies revolving around me that I'd created. And for your audience, what really stands out to me as I look back with the little connections that I could have seen, the things that seem like coincidences, but looking back, I believe they might have been signs from the universe, or at the very least, my subconscious directing me in certain directions. For me to have arrived at a wedding reception, having previously missed 5 weddings, for me to consider myself married to these disembodied voices, these were things that, as I look back on my career, having been addicted to drugs, I could have realized at different times. I could have seen the path that I was on and avoided a lot of the pain that I caused myself and that I caused others. So for your audience, there's often opportunities for us to examine the paths that we're on when we're struggling with drugs, or we're questioning whether addictive behaviors are harming us or harming those around us. If we look for the coincidences, if we look for the signs, whether we choose to interpret those signs as being from the universe or coming from within our own subconscious, if we stay aware and we stay focused on what's going on around us, hopefully you don't have to suffer the same pain I put upon myself. You don't have to cause others to suffer the way I caused others around me to suffer. This is hopefully one thing that audiences get out of my story.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the self-awareness thing is really important, and even in situations. I mean, we all find ourselves in situations that we kind of regret, or perhaps we don't know how to get out of. It may not be as serious as an addiction, or as life-threatening, and yet we kind of go all helpless and abdicate responsibility in some way. So the self-awareness thing and looking for the signs of how we might challenge our assumptions or how we might change our situation is really important. So thanks for that. Now, when did you then turn it around to the point where you said, okay, I've got a book in me now. I have to tell my story as as an education to others?
It was always my dream to be a writer. I never had the discipline, and drugs were an easier way to make me feel important, the way that writing, I believe, would have done. What happened was I had a conversation with an incredible individual named Seth Godin, who maybe you've heard of. A
Mm,
very, very popular, very well respected author and speaker. Seth is amazing in many regards, one of which is his dedication to second chances, to criminal justice reform. Seth helped an organization that I was part of called Defy Ventures. Defy Ventures is a nonprofit, and we kind of alluded to it earlier. Defy teaches entrepreneurism and employment inside prisons and to persons who were incarcerated and are now reentering society. We were on a bus, a Defy Ventures bus, that we were being hosted at various tech firms in the San Francisco Bay Area. We had the opportunity to meet Sheryl Sandberg from Facebook. We had the
mm,
opportunity to meet Jeff Weiner, the CEO of LinkedIn. So these individuals, so much to their credit, and it speaks so highly to their organizations, that of all the people who would desire an audience with Sheryl Sandberg or Jeff Weiner, they chose us because we represented formerly incarcerated persons who are turning their lives around. The point is, as all this is happening, I'm in a van with Seth Godin sitting right behind me. I screwed up my courage. I don't even remember what I said. Something about book, Seth, book, I want to write. I
Yeah.
don't remember what Seth said to me. I don't remember the words he used, but he planted some seed in my mind. He planted an idea. He planted within me the confidence that I could do something which would be of service to others. I'd struggled as a writer. I'd spent 10 years writing screenplays and short stories and would get an article published here and there until I had that conversation with Seth, until someone of his compassion, until someone like Seth and others who were part of the Five Ventures at the time, until I started to get these beliefs in myself as a person who had overcome a history of devastating drug addiction, as I overcame my history of incarceration. This conversation with Seth and my experience in the Five Ventures gave me a higher purpose, so to speak. So now I'm doing something. I'm not just Ed Cressy looking to be a famous screenwriter making a lot of money. I'm not
Mm.
just Ed Cressy publishing articles to get my. There's nothing wrong with any of that. What Seth and others gave me the opportunity to do was to re-examine my motives, and I discovered, hey, I can be of service. I can tell my story. I can be as honest as I can. I can be forthcoming. I can overcome fear. I can pursue that spiritual pathway, the spiritual being of the non-material. Instead of writing a book to make money or to be famous, I can write a book that maybe helps others the way so many others helped me. When I had that and I applied incredible perseverance, I got up before dawn every day for 18 months or something like that. I wrote 26 drafts of this book. Not every draft was starting from scratch, beginning to end. Some of them were sort of combed throughs where I would just read very carefully and finesse the details. I had to make so many decisions and overcome so much fear, whether it was decisions about how much I resented a person very close to me who appears as a character in the book. And my resentments and the fact that I was writing about this person forced me to re-examine the individual and see the good side,
Mm.
meaning my mind had been so clouded with resentments that I failed to see all the good the person had done for me. I had to overcome fear of deep shame around having had these beliefs that I'd inadvertently befriended a 9/11 hijacker and failed law enforcement and failed the American public. I mean, it's a long, long story. The point is,
Mm.
these were deep fears that were very, very meaningful to me. And this was years after I quit meth. I would
Mm.
sit there before dawn with my beloved steaming coffee at my side and my laptop's Apple Glow staring at me and wrestle with the fear and the doubt of how I was going to express myself and how I was going to tell my story. Because of the Seth Godins of the world, because of my belief in spiritual pathways, meaning being of service and things of a non-material nature, I was able to overcome so much fear and do something which gives, or which at least is my best attempt to give to others the way that so many people have given to me. And that's why I'm here today. That's why I'm not behind bars or locked up in an institution or in a grave.
Mm. Yeah, it's an interesting story. I wondered how you came to have Seth Godin endorse the book as the kind of the keynote or the featured endorser right up front. I thought, oh, that's cool. Yeah, and the book is fascinating. I'm about halfway through it, and it's a fascinating story. I mean, it's raw. It's beautifully written. It's kind of very honest and authentic and transparent in many ways. And there's a key message that kind of starts right at the beginning already. And even though there's lots of stories there that are very dark in some ways, there's that message of the power of the second chances coming through right throughout the book. So well done on that. And what I guess my question that comes from what you've just told us is, how difficult was it to confront those fears at a time where you'd kind of gotten to the point where your addiction was under control, you were clean, you were gainfully employed. You were contributing in many ways to society by your service to the charity you mentioned, and also the work you do professionally. How difficult was it to confront those fears again, and was it healing for you to write the book?
Confronting the Fears was a process so difficult it defies description. It was the most challenging. I never could have even imagined how challenging it would have been to undertake it, or how difficult. When I look back and see how challenging it was, I couldn't have imagined setting forth how challenging it would be. There is a quote I love and I think of all the time by Joseph Campbell. He writes, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." I said, you're familiar with the quote?
Yeah, I love that quote. Yeah,
I love it, and I found it to be
yeah.
so true.
I think he said the cave you most fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek.
That makes perfect sense. I found that to be remarkably true. The fears, when I look back, I see the fear was always pointing me in the direction that I needed to go. It's like there's a story about the butterfly in the cocoon. There's a person's hiking through the woods and encounters a butterfly struggling and struggling and struggling to get out of its cocoon. The butterfly is fighting and fighting. So the hiker takes out a knife and attempts to cut the cocoon, thinking this will help the butterfly. But really, it harms the butterfly because it's that struggle that gives the butterfly's wings the strength to fly. And the analogy being, we as human beings are much like that butterfly. There are circumstances in which we mightily struggle, and that's how it was for me writing this book. Yet looking back, I see that struggle gave my metaphorical wings the strength to carry me to heights of happiness, heights of fulfillment, heights of feeling that I can be of service to others, and to that spiritual path I pursue that no way, if I were staring at some Excel spreadsheet in my biotech job, as well as that job treated me, and as valuable as it is to work in a field like biotech or many other fields, as valuable as all that is, it never would have fulfilled me. I mean, I remember making six figures at my biotech firm years after I quit meth, working for a little company in Oakland, California that treated me incredibly well. Just wonderful people to work with, opportunity to help people suffering from illness. I remember sitting in my cubicle every day, fantasizing about going home and taking my .357 pistol, putting it in my mouth, and yanking the trigger. That's where I was at for a big chunk of my life, years after getting clean from drugs. And the point is, until I pursued that quote unquote higher purpose, until I found being of service to our sisters and brothers who are or were incarcerated, until I found the path of being in service to law enforcement, helping them better serve people struggling with addiction and incarceration, until I found that, the six figures, the biotech career, the other things, there's nothing wrong with any of it, but it never would have brought me even out of a point of suicidal depression, much less to a place where I truly believe I bring some degree of value to the communities around me. And ultimately, drugs are you kindly mentioned the subtitle of my book. Just because you're done with drugs doesn't mean drugs are done with you. The meaning of that subtitle has a couple of different meanings, but one meaning is that the goal of ending addiction is not to end addiction. That's not the goal. That's one necessary step when you get to the point I was at, or where others are at. We need to end our addictive behavior. We need to put aside the glass pipe, or the bottle of booze, or the unhealthy relationships, or the workaholism, or whatever it is. We need to take the step of ending that. That's not the end all, though. Our goal has got to be to lead a meaningful life. Our goal has got to,
find your purpose.
Find your purpose, exactly. Yeah. And then anything,
and follow that.
Follow your purpose. And when you mention fear, the only thing that's going to take us through the fear that we're going to face when we're doing something like writing a book, for many of us writing a book, or starting a business or any number of undertakings such as that. The only thing that's going to get us through the fear, which is going to rock our foundations, is that belief in a higher purpose, is that belief in a spiritual path. At least this is what I found. This is the only way that I found to overcome the fear that was such an integral part of doing something like pursuing my dream, writing a book.
Great. All right. Now, you talk a lot about second chances, and I'm thinking maybe take this in a little bit of a slightly different direction. A lot of people feel as though they're stuck in their life. And I'm thinking, hey, that sounds a little bit like being unfulfilled, not being clear on what value they're adding or why they're doing what they're doing. And in your case, you got to that point and you had a pretty sort of extreme reaction to it, if you like. A lot of people just go on living their life and kind of put up with it. And at some point, they look back on their life and they're sad or they're regretful, and they say, if only. What's your message to those people around second chances and around maybe turning a different path?
Well, you said it yourself. The one thing we know about the future, the only thing we know about the future, is our time upon this earth will end. We don't know anything else for certain about the future. We might not even make it to the end of this podcast. It could be a meteor strike, or any number of things could happen. We don't even know for absolute certain we will make it to the end of this podcast recording, but we do know without question that our time upon this earth will end. This time will come for all of us. So the questions are, number one, do we think there's another stage of the journey after that? And I believe that's for each individual to decide for herself or himself. Certainly, we might want to consider, upon what do we wish to look back upon when the time which we know will come does come? What are we going to look to? Are we going to want to look back upon a bank statement or a stock portfolio or a car? There's nothing wrong with any of them, nothing at all. But what are we really going to want to look back upon? And if we take it to another level, what's going to suit us best on the next stage of our journey if we decide to believe in these types of things, which I personally do. But again, I feel it's a choice for each individual to make. When we start with that, when we start with the one thing we know for absolute certain about the future, which is our time upon this earth will end, then we can kind of work backwards to today, this very day, and think, how do I want to live my life today? Knowing that, years, decades, whenever from now, I'm going to look back and what will I want my life? What will I want to look back upon? And then the other thing that springs to mind is really being of service to others. There's something about serving meals at a soup kitchen or homeless shelter, or certainly volunteering inside prisons or jails, if that's an opportunity which is available to you, or even reading books by people who have overcome incredible obstacles. There's one area I do know best is criminal justice reform. Not best in comparison to experts out there. I'm just saying that I know best out of the other areas of my own life. There's a great book. It just popped into my head by a man named Anthony Ray Hinton. It's called The Sun Does Shine. Anthony Ray Hinton spent 30 years on death row for a crime he didn't commit, was finally exonerated. The point is, to get back to your question, when we read stories like this, like Anthony Ray Hinton's, when we read other stories about people overcoming our obstacles, sometimes they can take us out of ourselves and give us ideas for how to make changes in our own life, because we got to make changes. If nothing changes, then nothing changes. If we keep doing the same old thing, we keep getting the same old thing. It's a wonderful discussion to have, because we can get into how the human mind is designed to keep us comfortable, to keep us safe, but not to make us happy, which, I would imagine you know far more than I do about this subject. We can get into the psychology of change. We can get into the psychology of thought patterns, but really for me, what's worked best is just to remember my time on this earth is limited, and someday I will look back, and someday I believe I'll go on to another stage of a journey and preparing for that eventuality.
Hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? That I was talking with a guest. It was Dr. Frank Kirshner on a recent podcast. I think it was 1 or 2 episodes ago. That and he said change is inevitable, but progress is not. And it's fascinating that sometimes we're so resistant to change, and yet change is happening all the time. I mean, as I speak and I get excited, so my state is changing. As I get excited, my heart rate increases. So that's a change. Yeah, that's all happening unconscious. As I walk faster down the street, my breathing increases, so I get more oxygen to my muscles. All of these things, the body is a change machine, and yet, our minds or our kind of thinking is let's get into the comfort zone and let's just relax into the same old way of doing things. And yet the body is actually a change machine.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. Change is inevitable, progress is not. And even in my book, I write about how addiction to drugs is a condition of comfort, oftentimes, because when I was deep in my addiction, I was miserable. I was desperately unhappy when the FBI and rogue police officers were coming to kick down my door, and I was cowering on my couch with my 12 gauge shotgun resting on my chest and a cold steel barrel pressed up against me because I was waiting for the FBI or biker gangs to kick down my door. I mean, this was all part of my delusions, my meth psychosis. These things weren't really happening out there, but I believed it. Point is, I was miserable in those circumstances when the disembodied voices that sounded like my parents were insulting and mocking me through the walls out of the thin air. I was miserable, but I was comfortable. I knew that the next day I could make it through those same circumstances. I knew I could live and exist from one day to the next in this extreme state of psychosis and addiction to drugs. I was comfortable because I had done it so many days in the past. I'd been doing it for 15 or more years at that point. Yet to change, and going back to our conversation on change, for me to change, for me to put aside the glass pipe, for me to attempt to pursue my dream of writing a book, I had no idea where that would lead. That extreme discomfort with not knowing where the change would lead to, that was what kept me. There were other factors too, but that was what kept me in the addiction, was that condition of comfort. Comfort does not equal happiness. And as human beings, we are programmed to be comfortable much more so than we're programmed to be happy. Going back to our prehistoric times, the person who was afraid to leave the cave in the middle of the night, way back in the prehistoric days, that person was the one who survived to pass along her genes to those of us still around today. Yet the person who took risks, the person who went out of his or her comfort zone back in the prehistoric days, the person who explored the woods in the dark of night, that was the one who was not around to pass along the genes, who fell off the cliff or was eaten by the tiger. So at a you could say at a physiological level, we are programmed to remain in our comfort zone because that's what keeps us alive. But unfortunately, as I found out in my life, and maybe others find out too, that state of comfort is in no way equal to a state of happiness.
Yeah. At the same time, though, I think one of the things that comes from, and if we change this thinking a little bit slightly around that, what's the prehistoric brain evolved over the years, is that the people who are most adaptable to changing situations possibly have survived. So, to be flexible and be adaptable to situations around you is probably a really good way. And then coming back to that self-awareness that we talked about earlier, being really self-aware of what what motivates you, what lights you up, what you're passionate about, whether it's writing a book or whether it's something else, and then having the courage to adapt and adapt and to the situation you're in and make the best of it.
I love that. So if I understand you correctly, the adaptability, so the going beyond one's comfort zone, and that necessitates the courage. That necessitates a belief in oneself, right? Like Nelson, I often think of Nelson Mandela's words that courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the triumph over it.
Yeah.
So it's having that self-awareness and the courage to move beyond fear. I like that. Yeah. Ultimately, fortunately, I was inspired by others' belief in me once I put the meth pipe away to do something like that. Yeah, I like what you're saying.
Yeah. Because I was just thinking the person that stayed in the cave all the time might have died of starvation.
It might,
because he had to go out and hunt or collect grains or whatever it was that was feeding you.
Exactly.
So there was some risk in that. All right. Now, tell us a little bit more about the work you do with the various foundations.
I work mostly with, until the pandemic, because what I was going to say was a lot of my work's been in prisons and jails, coaching incarcerated persons in skills around entrepreneurism and employment. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, which has affected so many of us, all of us probably in some respect, part of that is we're not able to go into jails or prisons anymore. The way I've found to get around that obstacle is by donating copies of my book to incarcerated persons. So we've got, I think, 400 and almost 450 books either donated or on their way being shipped or getting through the approval process to incarcerated persons. The other part of my work is with law enforcement, helping law enforcement entities such as the FBI, the San Francisco Police Department, the police departments here in Massachusetts where I am, helping them better serve communities affected by incarceration and addiction. In America and perhaps in other parts of the world, we are extremely polarized right now. We have, and in a few places is this more evident, this polarization, than at the intersection between law enforcement and communities affected by incarceration and addiction. While by no means do we intend blanket endorsement of all actions committed in the name of law enforcement, no way are we saying everything law enforcement, every action taken. No, we're not saying. What we are saying is that at the same time that we address the tragedies that happen as a result of actions taken in the name of law enforcement, at the same time we address those tragedies, I feel it's also worthwhile to society to look at the good things that can come as a result, that do come as a result from interactions between law enforcement and persons, communities affected by incarceration and addiction. So to give an example from my own life, the first time I was arrested, one of the first times, I remember being shackled to a steel rail in a police station with hot, salty tears pouring down my face. I believed I would never again see my beloved dog. So I'd been arrested. At the time, San Francisco, my hometown of San Francisco, had these draconian rules, these very harsh laws that you weren't allowed to walk your dog carrying a loaded 357 and a 1/16 of an ounce of methamphetamine. Yeah, that's a joke. But, eventually I pushed it too far. I was shoplifting hamburger to feed my dog and myself, and I carried a loaded pistol because I thought that people were after me. I needed to protect myself. The point is, that officer who arrested me as I was sitting shackled to that steel rail, that officer, she said a few kind words to me. Her name was Renee Pagano, Officer Renee Pagano. She's a captain right now. And what Officer Pagano said was something like, "I hope you get back on track." She was saying these words to me. I hope you get back on track. I realized, shackled to that steel rail, that Officer Pagano cared about me insofar as she cared about human beings in general. And I, even if just barely, fit into that category. Because of those kind words from Officer Pagano, and because of the beliefs, the confidence I got from others in law enforcement who instilled that confidence in me, who believed in me. There was, I remember when I was in drug rehab once, an off-duty police officer came in and spoke to us, and then he took a few of us from rehab, a few of us who were clients, into his own home. So here was an off-duty cop taking clients from rehab into his home so he could coach us on how to turn our lives around and put our alcoholism and drug addiction behind us. The point is that I learned to look past uniforms, whether worn by people in prison or whether worn by police. And I found that our sisters and brothers who are behind bars, many of them, not all of them, but many of them truly deserve to be walking the streets as free women and free men. And at the same time, many of the women and men behind squad car wheels and behind desks in pre-houses truly deserve to be protecting our streets. When I looked past uniforms, when I found that behind bars and behind badges beat the hearts of human beings, when our sisters and brothers who were incarcerated and women and men in law enforcement taught me to look for humanity in people, no matter what labels are applied to them or what uniforms they wear, and I could find these human connections. Not only did they help me become a better human being and get closer and closer to my best self, they helped me to contribute to society, which again is the point, at least in my case, of quitting drugs. To that higher purpose, that meaningful life. And this is the work that I do.
Yeah, oh, that's great. And I think there's a big message in there, and that's, if we care for our fellow human beings, then, we can make a difference. And at the same time, there are people that have displayed bad behavior, and seriously bad behavior in some cases. You're alluding to some of the bad incidents with police that's got a lot of press recently, which are pretty shocking. But at the same time, that's, that doesn't represent necessarily the majority. And if we care for other people, we can make a difference.
Absolutely. And yes, we need to address these shocking incidents. We need to address the tragedies that have taken place and are taking place on a daily basis because of actions that are taken in the name of law enforcement. Yeah, by no means do we as society want to endorse everything that every law enforcement person does any more than we would endorse all the actions taken by people like me who committed crimes and made mistakes and hurt ourselves and hurt others. But I feel at the same time we're addressing all of these things, we do also benefit ourselves as a society, again, by looking at the positive interactions between law enforcement and persons like me who come from backgrounds of criminality and addiction.
All right. Is there another book in the pipeline, Ed?
I hope not. I would love to. Right now, the hardest thing I found about writing a book is loving the book.
Yeah.
I wrote the book and then I thought I wanted to put it in my rearview mirror and kind of go on to the next thing. And I had to learn to love the book. And now I do love it. I love my book, and not in comparison to the great works of literature. My book is not even, my book's not the best book on addiction or recovery that's out there. Yet readers from my book get an inspiring story. Readers of my book get lessons that they can apply in their own lives. Readers get value out of my book. And that's why I love my book, not because it's a great classic work of memoir or anything like that. It's something that I am proud to put in the hands of a reader. And I hope that anyone who reads my book gets some amount of value out of it, because it's the result of so many compassionate, so many amazing people putting value into my life. It's, I found it's really worth believing in yourself. It's really worth pursuing a dream. The sacrifices that we make, the fear we overcome, the mountains we have to climb, the shiny, the tiny glimmering star in the dark, dark night that's our dreams is really worth reaching for, is really worth struggling for. That's what I found. These are the reasons I love my book, and I hope anyone who reads it loves it too, or at least loves
Yeah,
it.
and I certainly encourage the listener to go and get a copy of the book and read it, because it definitely is, it could be life changing. Now, you've got a very generous offer for people that do buy the book. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, thank you so much. For every copy that is purchased, we are donating a copy to incarcerated persons, to a woman or man serving time who is in the process of turning his life around through entrepreneurism, employment, or other programs. As I mentioned, we've already donated just shy of 450 copies. And since that process has been so successful, now we're doing a 1-for-1. So whomever might buy the book, you'll get a copy on your behalf donated to someone who deserves a second chance, and someone who's working very hard to put her or his past behind them and contribute to communities, families, and society.
That's wonderful. That's very generous. And so, so if you do buy the book, please write a comment on this blog post as well, and we'll make sure that Ed can get in touch with you and thank you for what you've done, and we'll see what else we can do. All right, well, this has been absolutely fabulous, Ed. Now, I'm going to skip the buzz round today because we haven't really talked about business, and I think the buzz round is all about business. It's kind of less appropriate here. But what I would like to ask is there some parting advice you'd like to leave our listener with today?
Find a version of a spiritual path, whether it's religion or God or karma or a higher purpose or being of service. Find something find something like that to pursue, and face your fears. It will be a challenge, but it's just like that Joseph Campbell quote. I can't say it better than he did. The cave you most fear to enter holds the treasure you seek.
Yeah, I love that. I love that quote. It's brilliant. All right. Well, finally, then, who else should I get on this podcast and why?
Quan Nguyen. I can spell his name for you after we're finished recording. Quan, very good friend of mine, served 20 years? He's either 20 or 30 years for murder. He was convicted of murder. I believe he was tried under the death penalty. I'm not positive. Quan has an amazing book that was just published. He's also, I believe, in the process of donating it to incarcerated persons. Quan, I can't speak highly enough of him. I feel your listeners would really get a lot of value out of Quan's story. He would be an amazing person. Another wonderful individual, good friend of mine, Shelley Winner. Shelley served about a year's time in federal prison on methamphetamine charges. Just before she went in, she gave birth to her first child, a son, then had to give the son up to her mother while she served time. Shelley is now working for Microsoft, an amazing person. She went through this process whereby she interviewed for Microsoft, was offered the job. Then she was forthcoming in the interview about her criminal history. Microsoft rescinded their offer after they offered the job. They took it back. So much to Microsoft's credit, they ended up bringing Shelley on board. She's doing incredibly well with the company. I believe she's blazed a path to other formerly incarcerated persons working for Microsoft. And Shelley also graduated from the same FBI citizens program that I graduated from. It's a highly selective program. They only take people who really have a dedicated interest in serving their communities. Shelley fits the bill. So I would say Quan Nguyen and Shelley Winner would be of amazing value to your audience.
Great. Well, we'll get introductions from you to Quan and Shelley and see if we can get them on the show in the future. Well, thanks so much for sharing your time with us so generously and being so open and so vulnerable with us today, Ed. I applaud you for, sharing your whole journey and history in the book, and also for putting it out there as a service to others, because I think it truly is a service to others. I applaud the people that have kind of supported you and motivated you to go forward. And Seth Godin has always been really high in my estimation, but he's just gotten a few extra brownie points today. So thanks for sharing that story too. And all the best for the future, and let's stay in touch.
Thank you, Jürgen. It's individuals such as yourself that give people like me the opportunities to tell our stories. That you make all the difference. So thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thanks. I hope you enjoyed that very raw and open conversation with Ed and are as inspired by this episode as I am. Ed shared so many meaningful, profound and unique insights into resiliency, into perseverance, service to others, self-improvement and social consciousness. I'd love to know what you took away from Ed's episode. Leave a comment below the blog post, which you can find at innovabiz.co/Ed Cressy. That is EDKRESSY, all lowercase, all one word, innovabiz.co/Ed Cressy. You'll also find contact information for getting in touch with Ed there, as well as links to his website, his book, his social media pages, and the other resources we spoke about in our conversation today. If you liked this episode, please share it with 2 other people that it might help. Tag me in that share, and I'll reach out to you with a special surprise. Ed suggested that we have a conversation with keynote speaker and Microsoft Surface specialist Shelley Winner on a future InnovaBuzz podcast episode. So Shelley, keep an eye on your inbox for an invitation from us to the InnovaBuzz podcast, courtesy of Ed Cressy. Tune in again to the next episodes of the InnovaBuzz podcast. We've got some more fantastic guests lined up, including Maxwell Nee of High Performing Coach and Michael Dietrich Chastain, author of Changes. Thanks for listening to this episode. Make sure you subscribe to the show to be reminded of new episodes. It's free to subscribe. Leave a review if you like. Even if you don't like me, I'm okay with that. I'm asking you to leave a review because it helps other people find this show. Go to innovabiz.co to join our marketing transformation community and access a free gift my team and I made for you. It's the Marketing Master Mini Class. We want to give you everything you need to transform your marketing into a human-centered, relationship-focused growth engine. Until next time, I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBiz. Remember, be awesome and keep innovating.